the essay. What should we put at the start of the essay? So the question is, outline and assess the usefulness of mixed methods. Outline and assess the usefulness of mixed methods for studying sexism. 25 marks.
Explain what mixed method and sexism is.
Okay, so explain two things. Mixed methods, keyword. Also need to define sexism. That's going to be a key thing to include in your essay answer. What else could you do at the start of the essay? Xenia? What else could you do at the start of the essay? So you define the keywords. What else could we do?
Talk about the perspective.
Okay, so when you say talk about the perspectives, what do you mean?
I mean, like, in terms of what methods they would prefer.
Right. When you say which they prefer, what kind of things might you say for this question? Well, that is something that I would do, but it depends how you do it, because there's a danger. If you say refer to perspectives and explain what they prefer, might be too much depth maybe, I don't know.
To say which perspectives prefer mixed methods and why. Like, how do
Okay, would you go into depth about why here yet, or just in the first bit?
No.
No? So you could say which would prefer it. Would it be worth saying something else as well about perspectives? Say which prefer it.
And what type of methods they use.
Yeah. So you could say which prefer mixed methods or might support it, and then you could say the perhaps perspectives that might have different views about mixed methods and maybe which methods they would prefer. So really what you're doing is trying to say about strengths and weaknesses in the first bit, just as a very brief list really in a sentence. So you're not really going into depth about why, but you're just mentioning who might support and who might not support the use of mixed methods. Does that make sense? Okay, so what else could we do after that then? So we've got a kind of introduction, we've defined key terms, we've shown that we understand that there are two main sides to the argument maybe.
And
okay, when you say do pervs, you can act like a perv or
no.
do perv. What? So you're going to use those concepts, perv G. What, are you going to do separate bits on those, or how are you going to do? How are we going to bring them in?
Would you use interpretivism and positivism in this question?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could say whether each perspective makes its practical
Right, okay, so you could do the methodologies and use that as your structure, and you could bring in perv G with the methodologies. So that gives you a clear structure, so that makes a logical structure that you're thinking about there. So that's a logical structure. Okay. So you could use the methodology. So which methodologies could we start with who might support it the most? And then which later might we use to kind of evaluate and criticise the most? So, Mustafa?
Realist or interactionist.
Okay, realists support mixed methods. Okay, so interactionists. Why interactionists?
Both of them want to have like a full picture of society. Don't know why I said interactionists.
Okay.
Realists want a full picture of society. Oh no, like interactionists think that like humans are so unique, you can't use generalized data, so they'd want to use both sets of data.
Okay, so you can't use like generalised data. Okay, so by generalised data, is everyone happy with that? Like
Statistics.
statistics, okay. Now, this probably leads us back to our definition of mixed methods. Do we understand what mixed methods means? So what could mixed methods mean, Omar?
Using more than one method of data collection.
So it's more than one.
Isn't like a mix of qualitative and quantitative?
It could be, but there's another way of doing it. So it could be mixing methodologies, okay, which means using mixed methods but with different methodologies. Okay, what would be an example of that?
Did you say?
Yeah, that
So
didn't.
mixing methodologies.
It didn't register. Can you say it again?
Yeah. So if the methodology is, let's say, interactionism is a qualitative. Or put it another way, interactionism is the view, or they have the view. Interpretivists, interactionists have the view that you should use qualitative system of collecting data. And
Does that come under a method or a methodology?
so the methodology is qualitative because it's the whole approach to how you should do research.
So
Yeah, so an interpretivist methodology is a view about how you should do research. A qualitative methodology is, involves the view of interpretivism. Okay, that would be an example of that. It's to do with the same thing, basically. It's the best way I can put it. Okay, if you're using a methodology, it's a system of doing research. Like a qualitative methodology involves the idea of collecting descriptive information. But the interpretivist view on that, a more accurate terminology, okay, this is more accurate for me, okay? Epistemology, this is the most accurate way of defining all of these terms, right? Epistemology is your view of how knowledge can and should be gathered. Okay, so for example, interpretivism, that's an example of an epistemology or an epistemological view. Okay, it's a view of how you can and should gather information. So their view is that we've got consciousness, so there's no point just measuring how we behave, we need to know what's going on in here. So knowledge must be gathered from inside somehow. And that involves people speaking, giving descriptions and so on about how they feel and think. Okay, so that's called an epistemology. There's also the word ontology. Ontology means a general view of the social world. So for example, an example of that is interactionism. So that's a view about the world and how the world works. The world works on the basis of human consciousness, based on how we define the world, how we interpret the world, and how we interact as a result of those interpretations. So if you label me as a bad teacher, that's likely to affect me, how I see myself. It's likely to affect you and how you see me and how you interact with me. If I label you as a good or a bad student and so on. So ontology is a view of the world and how the world works between human beings. Epistemology is a view of knowledge and how knowledge can be gathered from the world, how we can establish truths, whether we can establish truths at all that are always true. Can you always say that human beings will act this way in a certain condition, situation? So there's 4 methodologies. So interactionists we've put, but we really mean, when we say interactionists, we're talking about their view of the social world. So for a methods essay, you could probably use the term interpretivists. But look at it like this, okay? When you're wearing your clothing now, you're still Courtney. Okay? This is your student world clothing. Yeah? But when you go out to a big dinner and dance, you'll wear different clothing. You're still Courtney. Sorry? Alright, okay. Alright, so when you go to the dinner and dance where everyone's wearing a suit and a big ball gown, you'll be wearing your clothes, will you? Alright, well, it's not a good example. Let's take another example. Okay. What's an example where you change your clothing? A party, okay? So you're different at a party, but you're still corny, in a sense, all right? So it's just, this is their social world explanation label, and this is their research methods label. Okay? Interpretivists and interactionists are basically the same kind of people, but when they're talking about research, we call them interpretivists. When we're talking about how they explain the social world, we call them interactionists, because that's what they are called in terms of their research methods and their explanation of the social world. It's just different labels for the same kind of view.
So is that kind of like the positive and like the
Exactly. So that's just, yeah, so don't be confused, that's all it is.
That's really, really confusing because I thought that interactions was just for the other sections and
So-
then just for this section.
No, don't worry. All it means is just, in terms of research in the world, they have a different label, but it's still the same kind of people. Okay? So we've got the realists, fuller picture of society, so they advocate mixed methods. Okay, and there's key concepts that we need there for realists. For interpretivists, we've said that, you know, they think that statistics can't be used to get truth. So when it comes to what mixed methods means, it depends on what mixed methods means, okay? If you're using a certain type of mixed methods, okay, then the interactionists might agree with it. But if you're using a different type of mixed methods, then the interactionists might disagree with it. Okay, so what I mean is if you're mixing qualitative and quantitative types of data, then they might agree with the use especially of the qualitative methods. If you're using a quantitative way of doing research, you're using lots of methods within that, like surveys and structured interviews, and you're just measuring numbers, then they might disagree with that type of mixed methods because they prefer the more in-depth information. Yeah, but it's still mixed methods.
So if
Because-
they
Two
use
different types.
like questionnaires and interviews, that's two types, so it'd be mixed methods.
Yeah, that could be seen as a mixed methods research. If it's a structured interview, you just gather, you know, closed questions, and you're just gathering numerical data, and you've got data from secondary research, official crime statistics. It's all quantitative data and methods. So mixed methods is generally mixing qualitative and quantitative data, as we said, but it can involve using more than one type of the same type of research method. Okay? So generally, they would argue about the statistics, but they would support, you know, the use of mixed methods, especially if it involves qualitative data. Okay, but they tend to say that we can't be scientific. What do the realists say about science? Anyone? What do the realists say about science? Whether can sociology be a science and things
They
like
can
that?
study humans like objects.
You can't.
Well, that's what the positivists would say. We can study humans
No,
like objects in the natural world.
don't they believe you can't because humans have a consciousness?
That's their words.
Isn't
Human
that
consciousness.
Human consciousness, but they kind of have the same idea. The realists have the same idea
As interactionists.
as interactions about consciousness. But they also think that the positivists are onto something with their ideas about measuring quantitative data as well. So they're influenced by the idea about human consciousness, which creates what we call the social construction problem. Yeah, where everything is flawed because it's all shaped by my perception and not by reality and this. The realists agree with that. There's this problem of social construction of data. Okay, like the left realists think that the official crime statistics are flawed. There is racism and so on, which flaws the data. So they agree with that idea, but they also agree with positivists that it's important to study a different level of data apart from the depth, but also look at the big scale. So they're trying to look at everything, from the small scale to the big scale. So that's a fuller picture of society. So it's trying to account for the structures and measure those structures, and it's also trying to account for agency and trying to understand why people do things the way they do. Why do we act? What do we do with our choices? Okay. So the positivists argue that we can study objects like the natural sciences, which is to be objective. Okay? So what does objective mean?
Remove your own opinion.
Removing opinion, value-free. Okay? So I think we can be value-free because we can remove our opinions and beliefs from the research process. The interactionists, what do they think about the idea of objectivity?
Doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist?
You need to be subjective to understand.
You need to be subjective to understand. So not only do they say we're always subjective, we're always biased, we need to understand subjectivity. They want verstehen. So what does that have to do with subjectivity? Right, and the person they're talking to is the subject of research. So instead of just treating them like an object, they're trying to gain understanding from their perspective. So trying to see how they feel as a subject. Okay, so because there's this distinction, what we call the object-subject division. Okay, that kind of dichotomy of, I'm objective, and you're the subject of my research, and I'm able to measure what's happening and what you're doing. And that tells me about you and who you are. But the interactionists say there's no real division. We're all human, we're all conscious and aware, and that shapes how we see the world. So that not only is research always going to be value-laden, we need to achieve that understanding. Okay, so what about the feminists? What about the feminists? Sophie Lee, what about the feminists? What do you think they would say about doing this question, mixed methods for sexism? What do you think they'd say about mixed methods? So you get women's views and also... Right? Yeah, you could say that, yes. So women's views could be gathered, but also trying to generalise to all women so that we know it's not just the individual experience of some women who made the wrong choices, but actually all women are subjects of. So for example, if you look at domestic violence, 25% of women will experience domestic violence or some experience of that at some point in their lives. So if all women experience domestic violence, it's not a problem with a particular group who've made certain choices or situations. All women, so that means patriarchy, all women experience patriarchy. So we've got the issue of detail on women's views and experiences from their perspective, which feminists want to know about lived experience. So they say we want to know how it feels to be, and explore the issue of how it feels to be a woman or someone from a minority background who's experiencing racism. So in this case, sexism.
How would we define sexism? Is there anything on sexism, or is it just what we should know?
Well, the example, the case study I would give is Oakley's one I was going to mention. But you could refer to any study. But if you look at Skeggs as well, and with those case studies, with Oakley's studies about the social construction of motherhood, but she's basically saying that the beliefs about gender create different treatment of the sexes. So in other words, women feel pressure to be good mothers because of their sex as female. So this is different treatment of women. That's sexism. And there's also the Skeggs study where it was working class women who were trying to achieve respectability in education. So again, it's sexism because they're trying to avoid being labelled as kind of dirty and shameful working class women, trying to be respectable middle class women. So again, it's sexism and it's also related to class as well. So this is homework for last Friday of term. So that will be 2 weeks' time, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, 2 weeks' time.
So where can I find the studies for this?
So the studies, the Skeggs study is in the book, so you could use that one, and that is a mixed method study, so you could use it in a range of ways, not necessarily just for feminists, but there's Skeggs. Okay, that's in the book. That's a mixed method study.
Are these with the research method section, or are they in the method section?
That, I think it's mentioned twice in both sections, I believe, but I know Skeggs is at the end of the section where it mentions intersectionality, I'm sure.
We're gonna go to the front.
There's a good one at the Skeggs on Google Books or Google Scholar articles or something like that. Skeggs is on there.
Skeggs is this one, sorry?
You know, when you type in Google and it comes up with the scholars' articles, there's a good study of Skeggs on there as well.
Oh, right, it's got information on Skeggs online.
Yeah.
Where did you say that's found?
Just type it into Google,
Okay.
and then it's like the first one where it says scholars' articles.
School. What did you say?
Schools' articles.
Scores articles.
Scholars.
Scholars articles. Okay. Scholars articles. Okay. Okay. So that would be good, because in the book it does mention Skeggs in there, but probably want more information than it gives you. Intersectionality. Right, yeah, page 232, it's got intersectionality, and it mentions, it's got the Teal study and the Skeggs study there. So 232. The good thing about that one, both of those, is they're intersectionality studies, so you could use them for anything. Any question about research or about inequality, because this Teal study is about gender, it's about class, it's about...
Seems to be more about men.
Yeah, that one was more about males. Obviously sexism is applied, could be applied to males.
Would you use that one with them in your email, just over they were just focusing mainly on men instead of using both male and women, as sexist, because they're focusing mainly on sex.
Yeah, I mean you could, obviously there's the point feminists would say that research is too male stream, so it's focused on male interests and male subjects and so on, so you could make that point. Yeah, because it's about class and gender. But one of the feminist views is that class is a kind of male issue. So there's this idea about male stream. If class is a male issue, it's because men occupy the workplace. So if it's a study of the workplace because it's male builders, the feminists might be critical of it. The Skeggs study is good for a range of topics, not only gender, because it's relevant to class, because they're working class females. Also education, age, because they're women in education. Okay, it's a longitudinal study. Okay, so there are some studies in the book and online. There's some key names, like for realists, there's key names like Rie. Positivists, obviously you've got Durkheim, feminists. Oakley. Oakley is another study. I mentioned the study, Social Construction of Motherhood. You could use that study, or you could use another study. You need to use some kind of evidence. So you've got concepts in there already.
About
Interactionist study. So you've got people like Gouldner, Becker. One of the criticisms from feminists is that they focus mainly on the interactions focus too much on male identity.
I know it's fine if it's done.
Come in. So interpretivist, there's someone called Gouldner. I mean, it's really worth reading books about this. Some of the students were saying, you know, I've used the book, but I'm still confused, and that was partly because I hadn't explained all of this. But if you use the resources sheet, and I'm going to send that to the A2 groups just to make sure you've got it. But the resources sheet, you've got Harold Ambus, you've got sociology.org.uk. It's a really good website. On sociology.org.uk, you've got links to teachers' notes for a range of topics for sociology. It's written by an A-level teacher. It's textbook detail. It's more detailed than the textbook you've got in front of you. Let's see what you've got there. Okay, so I'm going to write that website up, and I suggest you use it, read around the subject, because really, you know, you have to learn the studies, you have to learn the approaches, and apply the knowledge, and get confident with the methodologies. So, I've also got online Google Drive materials, and I have got links to that. So I'll send out the quick links for the Google Drive stuff. Okay, so sociology.org.uk, Google Drive, I'll send you links to that. The Google Drive material's got loads of information. I told you about my email from a student who I've never met, but has watched my videos, got a B grade in her A-level sociology, for watching the videos. So use the videos on YouTube as well. Okay, I want to make the videos more image-based, so, you know, but basically it's got really good detailed information. Really useful, really good. So, okay, does that help with the essay question? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, so do you have any questions? Any other further questions?
So our conclusion would just say which mixed method is most useful.
You could say which particular type of mixed methods is useful, because we said there's two types. You could say overall, whether mixed methods overall are useful, because that's the overall question. The overall question is about mixed methods. So the key thing with essays is to simplify things. Students often think it's got to be complex. Obviously you've got to present evidence, but you're writing for someone who's intelligent but uninformed about the subject. So answer the question at all times. Okay? Answer the question. Try to make everything you say relevant to the question. That's the challenging bit for A-level students, really. So try to make it relevant to the question. If it's relevant to the question, it's going to be better than loads of stuff which doesn't really answer the question. The conclusion should be a decision. You know, how useful are mixed methods as an approach for studying the topic of sexism? Okay. We haven't mentioned sexism here. There are some specific studies which relate to sexism. Okay, there's some specific studies, like for realists, there's a study about sex crimes in the media. So there's actually a study which takes a realist approach to sex crimes. And it's by two people. It's called Soot, Hill and Glover. So that one is actually a realist approach, and it studies sex crimes. So it's perfect for this essay, actually. Although obviously sexism is an issue where you might say, well, how is that related to sex crimes? I don't understand the connection. But this was a study of different levels of reality. So remember, the realists are looking at different levels of reality. So looking at consciousness. Okay, how do people think about the opposite sex as a result of what they watch in the media and so on? But also looking at behaviour, so like patterns of crime. How do people actually act? And is there some kind of connection between one layer of reality and another layer of reality? I'm trying to put all of that information together to try and see if there are connections. Because there are so many hidden mechanisms and processes, it's trying to get at all the different levels of detail. Okay, so there are a range of studies that you can use which relate to sexism specifically. Obviously, you know, Durkheim's study, looking at things like singlehood and so on. Okay, so that's due next a week on next Friday, so that's 2 weeks' time. Okay, so no one got any questions? Okay, so we're going to look into quantitative methods. Okay, the key thing with this is I really don't want to teach you about the quantitative methods. The reason why I don't think that it would be useful for me to spend my time going over questionnaires and things with you is because really we should know about that from last year. The key difficulty this year is doing a 15 or a 25 mark question on quantitative methods. So if we had a 25 mark question like this one on questionnaires, you know, what would we say? And the thing to do would be to say about the methodologies, refer to PERG G, like when you're mentioning realists, you know, validity and reliability can be increased through triangulation with mixed methods. So you're adding concepts, you're adding validity and reliability there. So let's look at quantitative methods, but let's apply our methodology knowledge to it. Okay, so there's questionnaires, structured interviews. Right, let's see if we can just do a bit of work on these. Okay, on the methodologies. Okay, so Omar and Alicia, if you talk about questionnaires and how you'd apply the methodologies, like we applied it to mixed methods. So remember, we did a particular order. For mixed methods, I'd probably have realism first, because that's what you were thinking. And you were thinking about the logical order as well. So thinking about the structure, what would you put as the methodologies at the start for questionnaires essay? 25 marks like that one. Okay, and how would you do a 15 as well? So 15 is basically about the strengths. So 15 is just the strengths of questionnaires mainly. So you could have realists and positivists and feminists. But you'd have concepts like reliability. So thinking about the 25, what would be a logical structure? What would be the order of points? Okay. So Sophie, Lee and Renee, could you look at structured interviews and do the same thing? What would be a 15 and a 25 mark question, and what would be a logical order of points?
Can I go get some tissue?
Yeah. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Right, there's 3 more. Okay, so Courtney, could you look at semi-structured interviews? There's not much on them there, but you can use the ideas about structured interviews and unstructured interviews. It depends how open-ended and how many closed questions you have in a semi-structured interview. Okay, so it's going to be a mixture of those types of interviews, structured and unstructured. Okay, so again, what would be the order of points, the methodologies for 15 and 25? What concepts could you include for 15 and 25? Okay, and we'll go through it and clarify, and I'll come round to this one. Farhana, could you look at statistical data? Mustafa, could you look at content analysis with Xenia? In fact, Mustafa, could you look at content analysis? Xenia, could I ask you to work with Omar on questionnaires? Could you do that? Okay, please, thank you. Okay, so we'll come round and talk to you. Okay, so think about the logical order of points. What concepts you'd use?